Okay, so I'd like to set up an 8-team college football playoff consisting only of conference champions. I want each conference to have roughly the same strength of schedule. So I'm going to have to remake the conferences every year. I'm going to rate the teams based on their performance in the previous year. And then I also want the conferences to be localized geographically. So I'm trying to simultaneously balance the conferences in terms of strength and also have the teams be kind of close together within a conference. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is rank all of the teams based on last year's performance. There are already a lot of ways of doing this. I'm making up a new one. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, but I also want to make sure I incorporate strength of schedule. So the first thing is I'm only going to consider games between Division 1A teams. So I'm going to look at all of those games. I'm going to call WW the number of wins by the teams that you've beaten, and LL is going to be the number of losses by teams you lost to. And so then my ranking is going to be this W3L3, and that's defined as the WW of the teams you beat minus the LL of the teams you've lost to. So if you don't like this ranking system, you can make up your own, but that's what I'm going to be using. So I take the top 8 teams from 2014. Here they are. And each team is going to be in a different conference, and the location of the home stadium of each team is going to be the center of the conference, at least initially. So we have those 8 teams, and then we take the next 8 teams, the teams 9 through 16, and we're going to pair up each one of these with one of the ones in the first 8. So for every group of 8 teams, we're going to put one of those teams in a conference, and we're going to go all the way through until we have 72 teams, 8 teams, 9 conferences. So we want to pair these up, and some of these pairings are going to be obvious. So like Arizona and UCLA, they should be in the same conference. Oregon and Boise State should be in the same conference. These over here are less obvious, so we're going to have some kind of mathematical formula for deciding which team goes in which conference. So what we're going to do, we're just going to minimize the sum of the distances squared. So we take each of these white teams, we see how far away it is from each conference center, and then we pick the allocation that minimizes the sum of those distances squared. So here's what we have. Here's the top 16 teams in 8 different conferences. And now before we add the third team, what we're going to do is we're going to look at each conference, and the new center of the conference is going to be the average of the locations of all the teams. So in between these 2 yellow teams, that's going to be the center of the yellow conference. And then we're going to move on to the next group of 8 teams. So here they are. And then we just do the same thing as before. We're minimizing the distance squared of each of these teams to the center of the respective conferences. Here are the top 24 teams in 8 different conferences. And if you look at this just geographically, you see that the teams aren't as close together as they could be. So for example, you could have swapped this yellow and red team, and that would put all 3 yellows closer together. You could also swap this orange and red team and put the 3 orange teams together. But if you do that, then the conferences aren't going to have the same strength. So there's a trade-off there. And the way I deal with this is first I go through all 72 teams. I put them into their conferences based on this idea of minimizing the distance squared and then resetting the conference center each time. After I've done that, then I look at each conference and I find the team that is farthest away from the center. I do that for each of the 8 conferences, and then I reassign those 8 teams to the conferences such that I'm minimizing the distance squared again. And I just keep repeating that. I keep taking the 8 teams that are farthest away, rearranging them, and I do that until I get a stable solution. So after I've done that, I've got 8 conferences. I'll quickly go through them. This is the Northeast Conference. It's got the number 1 team, Ohio State, in it. The Northwest Conference, it has teams from the Northwest, including Oregon. The Florida Conference, this has all four teams, all four of the Florida teams, and some other teams that are close by. I've got the Iron Conference, which has the Auburn-Alabama rivalry. Got the Atlantic Conference. I've got a conference in the Great Plains. So here's the Midwest Conference, led by Mississippi, which you might not think of as a Midwest college, but we have to put them in there in order to balance out the schedules. And then the Southwest Conference that has teams from both California and Texas, Oklahoma, separated by the Rockies. They have a pretty long travel distance, but that's just the way it works out. So for the season, you've got 8 conference games. You play everyone in your conference, and then you've got 4 non-conference games. You can play your rivalry games. You can also schedule games against the more difficult teams in the other conferences. And this is going to make a difference because the tiebreaker in the conference, if you tie your schedule in the conference, then the team that beats the best non-conference team is the one that goes on to the playoffs. Then once you get your 8 playoff teams, the seeding is done by your rankings, which I'm using this W3L3. And the top seed of the playoff gets to pick the location. So there'll be 4 bowl games scheduled for this. They pick the location, and they also get to pick whatever opponent they want that doesn't force a rematch. So the number 1 team could pick the number 8 team, or they could play whatever team they think they're going to do well against. So there are 56 teams that don't make it into one of these playoff conferences. And so what we do with them, we put them into 8 more conferences. We have these non-playoff conferences. We have 8 champions from these conferences. They all play each other in a bowl game. They play a single game. The winner of this game moves up into a playoff conference the next year. And then the 4 worst teams from this year, they all drop out. So every year you've got 4 new teams coming into your playoff system. And then you make 8 new conferences again from the 72 teams that you have. So for the 2015 season, I'm going to be simulating this on my website that's listed here, so you can look and see who wins each of the 8 conferences. So that's it.